The hammer of witches. We burned the coven at dawn, explained the priest. Only the matriarch remains. Followed by a jowly bishop in elaborate garments, the priest strolled through his ancient chapel. Smoke haunted the cobblestone corridors, which seemed to be held together by rotting wood and faith alone.
Wonderful,
celebrated the bishop.
I'm starving. We must break for lunch soon.
I'm not hungry.
Ha, even better,
laughed the bishop.
More for me.
This feels wrong.
What's wrong is the emptiness in my gut.
Nothing about this case resembles what I learned in the Malleus Maleficarum.
Blasphemous!
Joked the bishop.
Who are you to question the hammer of witches?
I took confessions from these women. None had done so much as kill a rabbit in winter without a month's regret.
And you never thought that unrealistic, you child. I can still hear them celebrating on the pyre. I'll grant you, I'll never seen anything like it. You were right to send for me.
How will I face their mothers? I failed them.
You're a good man, Father. Best to ignore the machinations of Satanists for sanity's sake. Besides, if they spoke true, it would mean men like us are evil. Do you think I'm evil, Father?
No, Your Holiness, stuttered the priest, caught off guard. Before the conversation could continue, they reached a crude dirt hole, the witch pit. The priest lit a torch and peeked inside. Caked in mud, a nude woman with a shaved head smiled up at him. "Watch your head!" shouted the priest before throwing down a rope ladder.
Is that really necessary?
Joked the bishop. The witch started climbing.
You're about to kill her.
All the more reason to be kind now. The witch reached the top, still smiling, and began walking toward the pyre.
Isn't she eager?
Mocked the bishop as he struggled to keep pace. On behalf of you-know-who, I'd like to thank you two, taunted the witch without slowing down.
Silence!
Scolded the bishop. Ignorance! Shouted the witch. From what but fire and pain could true evil be born? If that's true, reasoned the priest, where are your newborn witches? Why would anyone choose to linger here? Cackled the witch as a draft blew through the dark, rotting hallway. Neither answered. They reached the pyre. It stood a few meters tall. The witch climbed up without a word and waited for showtime.
Your machinations will persist no further,
shouted the bishop. Quit stalling, screamed the witch. Create me. Skipping last rites, the bishop stole the priest's torch and set the pyre ablaze.
Any last words?
Joked the bishop. The Malleus Maleficarum is the hammer of witches, not the hammer of God, she revealed. As the flames touched her leg and spread up her body, her celebration turned to panicked ecstasy. Take me, Satan! She celebrated. The spectacle only lasted a minute. Soon, only ash remained. Without another word, the bishop broke for lunch. The priest followed. Martha's Handbook. Gather round the fire, children, and let Grandpa tell you a story about a lady named Martha Bell. People in the village believed her to be a witch and were very frightened to be anywhere around her, oftentimes heading in the opposite direction if she was heading towards them. She lived in a cabin on the outskirts of the village, nestled deep within the Black Mill Forest. Not even the bravest of the villagers would venture anywhere near Martha's cabin. As a matter of fact, it was almost an unwritten law to never even go near it. A rhyme about Martha started to spread across the village youngsters and would even be told by parents to their young children before bed to warn them of the dangers of Martha and what happens when you don't mind your parents. The rhyme went like this: Martha Bell, if she hears you crying, she'll drag you straight to hell. So be good and never bad, or she'll steal you from your moms and dads. She'll hang you up one by one until you're dead, then her deed is done. That rhyme terrified the children of the village. They would do everything in their power to stay away from her, even crossing the street if she came towards them as she walked through town. She wore all black, her face covered in a black lace veil. Her hair, which was the color of gray, was wrapped tightly in a bun, and she always, without no exception, carried her handbook with her. Now, children, there are only 2 books I know of that you must never read from. Those are the Book of Stoolzabub, the Demon of Shit and Unholy Excrements, and the other is Martha's Handbook. No one really knows exactly what was inside Martha's Handbook. Some say her spells and incantations. Others say the handbook held the secrets of the devil himself, written in its pages. Whatever the case, she would play a game with her handbook. She would leave her book laying out, and whoever would pick it up to try and give it back to her, she would unleash a blood-curdling shriek right in their face, snatch her book from their hand and storm off. But the frightening thing is, whoever picked up her book would later disappear. 12 children in total were never heard from again. Their bodies were never found, and nobody knows what happened to them. Are their spirits lost and roaming the woods near her cabin? Perhaps. Who knows for certain? But what I do know, children, is this. If you see an old handbook just laying around, resist the urge to pick it up, for you might be the next to get a visit from Martha. New Witch on the Block. There was one rule in Little Root Village, where I come from. Don't talk to Becky. Ever. Why? For one thing, she looked nothing like the other women. Becky was short and dressed shabbily, even though there was a fine tailor in town. A scar ran down her left cheek towards her chin. Cold green eyes stared out of a creased, wrinkled face. Secondly, she wasn't the friendly sort. Ever since she moved in, She had been scowling at everybody, man, woman, or child, her green eyes boring into them, as if daring them to pick a fight with her. Needless to say, everybody was terrified of her. Lastly, there were rumors flying around. To be fair, as we never talked to Becky or found out exactly what she was like, all we could do was speculate. "Have you heard what Becky actually is?" said my friend Mildred during knitting club. "What?" I asked. "That her mom's a witch. Apparently she passed on her secrets and knowledge to her daughter. That's why she's so, weird." I laughed. "Come on, witches don't even exist. There's no way people would believe that." But people did believe it. For some reason, that particular rumor caught fire. That was the reason for the candy-colored smoke puffing out of her house, they said. Because she was a witch. And soon, rumor became truth. Becky was not human. She was a filthy curse upon the world. A town meeting was held one night, and it was decided that it was best for the village and God's earth that she was eradicated from this world. And so they marched, man, woman, and child, towards Becky's house, their faces burning red in their fiery torches. Becky came out, I think, held her hands up in surrender, whispered words of prayer. Fear danced in her emerald green eyes. But the mob yelled and threw their torches towards her and her house, and as soon as the sparks touched the straw, it caught fire. Flames rolled across the roof and licked the walls. Some were bold enough to throw their torches at Becky herself, and she lit up, a human torch. Her screams penetrated the night. There was nothing left. Everybody swept up the ashes the next morning and considered it a job well done. Then people started waking up weeks later with 4 stomachs and their hands melted into hooves. Some were bent forward, barely speaking English. Others were covered in fur and sprouted horns. Husbands hollered and wives wailed, but everybody agreed that for some reason the humans turned animals were plump and juicy. Feasts and barbecues were held every night, and the food was delicious. Personally, I never harassed Becky, nor took part in the mob that ended her life, just steered clear like everybody else. However, this morning I woke up with my body unnaturally pink and furry, and my nose and mouth squashed into a snout. Worst of all, there were people staring through the window. Their eyes shone with hunger. Spook the Witch. There was a game the neighborhood children and I used to play in the woods of Dorset, Vermont. The game was called Spook the Witch. There wasn't a specific number of kids needed to play the game. Some nights, we'd have over a dozen kids out there in the moonlight, and other nights we'd only have maybe 3 or 4. Those were the scarier and much more exciting times to play, because that security blanket you have with numbers had been taken from you. The goal was to split up and go our separate ways into the woods, but still heading in the same direction to see who could get to the witch's house first and spook her. Being kids and not believing or trusting enough to use the honor system, we had to grab an item from where the witch lived to show as proof that we were there. I'm sad to say, in the year we had been playing this game, no kid had ever spooked the witch of the Dorset woods. Gus, a husky kid, claimed to have made it in her house, grabbed a handful of her hair before making it back to receive more praise than anyone in town could ever hope for. It didn't take us long to figure out he had managed to find a clump of animal fur stuck to a broken branch and thought he could fool us. That was one of the good times, but I now remember why we stopped playing and never returned to Dorset Woods. A few weeks after the hilarious animal fur hoax, we went out for another try. None of us knew it, but Gus was distraught that he had been teased all week and that this time he wasn't going to be made a fool. 8 of us, including a suspiciously quiet Gus, ventured out into the woods this night. 7 of us returned empty-handed and laughed about how none of us came close until we realized Mikey wasn't laughing, but crying. Through his tears, he told us that he watched from the tree line as Gus marched right up to the witch's house. Mikey said he walked up to the door as if he was on a mission, and before Gus could open the door, it swung open, exposing a disgustingly short, naked woman with very long, unkempt gray hair, illuminated by the moonlight. Mikey took multiple deep breaths between tears before he finally managed to say, She grabbed Gus. He shouted for his mommy, but his screams had already been muffled by the door closing shut for good. I knew I couldn't do anything, so I just ran and ran." Spook the Witch was a fun game until that night, when we found out that she was playing the game too. The Bell Witch Cave. This happened to me while I was in college. I went to college in Kentucky, only about an hour away from Adams, Tennessee, where the Bell Witch Cave is located. Adams is a tiny one-stoplight town that you might miss if you blink. If you don't know what the Bell Witch Cave is, either read the Wikipedia article on it or watch the movie An American Haunting. I had a boss in the student library where I worked that told me you couldn't pay him enough money to go back there, and the ghost was able to whisper something to his girlfriend that only she knew. He also warned me not to challenge the ghost. Anyway, me and 2 friends decided to jump into my old Dodge Dynasty and head down there on Halloween night for a tour. We got there just in time for the last tour of the night at midnight. While on the tour, we went past some old Indian remains and a little deeper into the cave where some water was running. The farthest they'll usually take you is a formation called Eagle Rock. I stuck my head past the rock, and I could have sworn some greenish light flashed from the back of the cave towards me. It made me shake my head a couple of times. We got ready to leave the cave, and of course, as a half joke, I called out, "Kate, show yourself!" Immediately, I heard something whisper, but I couldn't make out the words. I dismissed it as hearing other tour-goers talking in the distance. My friends and I started back towards my car. It was about 50 degrees out, so a rather cool fall night. As we came up the hill, we suddenly hit a spot of extremely warm air rising from the ground. I'd estimate 75 degrees or more. It smelled strange, too, like flint. We explained it away as likely some hot water from the cave running close to the surface there, but it still seemed odd. As we got closer to the grass parking lot, we heard the family's dog barking incessantly at something. We finally saw my car, and then we saw the dog bolt from the car with its tail between its legs. I joked that it was barking at the ghost haunting my car. We got in the car and started it up and headed back towards the highway. Strange things started to happen. The heat was on full blast, but the interior of the car would not warm up. Both my friends and I commented it felt like something was trying to make us cry or our eyes water up. The windows all fogged up, and as we passed an exit and some lights, we noticed a backwards K and a handprint embossed in the fog on the outside of the window. By the next exit, a P had formed on the windows outside. During the tour, we had been told the ghost had been known as Kate or Pela. Things didn't really quiet down until we got to the Kentucky border, and the heat finally started working, and the fog disappeared from the windows. Sometimes even now, I feel the pull of the ghost of the Bell Witch Cave, asking me to return. I don't know what would happen if I did. I'm getting chills just writing this. The 5th day of the 5th month of the 5th year. It was on the 5th day of the 5th month of the 5th year when the witches met once more. The Crimson Witch, adorned with rubies and caked with wonderful water of blood, wore a red cloak with a crown of red that day. Her hands, withered and veiny as they were, held onto her crimson staff with a strength surpassing that of even the oldest of gods. The Violet Witch was next to emerge from the place where mountains split and flesh sing, her hands blue as the deepest oceans and her crown wet with water. Her cloak was one of blue, one that expelled hope, leaving it to drown under the takings of the water. And lastly, the youngest, the Green Witch, ever so youthful, her naked form adorned with vines and leaves, her skin smooth and brown like that of a warm oak, her green eyes glinted in the abyss. The three understood their goal. They understood their purpose the moment they arose in the lakes of lava, from the deep blues of ocean abyss, and from the ever-wrapping vines and vegetation. It was a simple one, their goal, that is, a goal that had been before them and before their descendants. They walked quickly in the pale moonlight, making their way quickly towards that of the cave. The Green Witch looks at her mentors for guidance. They only nod. The cave's interior is once of abyss, a cold and unforgiving space in which no light returned. The creatures that inhabited, they were not ready for the world above, a world of beauty, a world that they would taint and destroy, pillage until nothing but crimson remained, throwing the world off its balance until nothing remained, an abyss would consume once more. Their forms were pale, skeletal, their eyes glint in the abyss with eyes of malice. The Crimson Witch prepared her fire. The Violet Witch prepared her water. The Green Witch prepared her vegetation. The humans were not going to escape into the world above just yet. Wishes among witches. Branches bludgeoned each other from within the trees. The wind pushed them together like racks upon the shoulders of mighty elks. It howled up from the south, plucking my scarf right from my neck and carrying it into the night. I watched it drift away for a moment, longing to go with it. But in an instant, it was swallowed up by the void and no longer. My candle flickered in the darkness. Hope, I feared, was the only thing that kept the lantern lit. And it was something that was diminishing rather quickly. I forced my feet to move forward, peeling each step as if the soles of my boots were mired in a glue. It felt like ages before I reached the mouth of the cave at the edge of the forbidden forest. Whispers fluttered in the breeze as I started into its shadow. A chill seized my spine. Goose flesh broke out upon my forearms as I placed a small satchel a few feet away. It was my sacrifice, my offering, my wish. The closer I got back to the cottage, the more the fear subsided, and in its absence, I felt silly. A witch in a cave at the edge of the woods that the church had deemed unclean, one that could grant you a wish if given the right offering. I shook my head and ran my thumb over my rosary. Fool. I was a desperate fool. The front door lay loosely, nearly off its hinges. A lump developed in my throat, threatening to choke me. My footfalls echoed off the stone floor as I made my way to the bedrooms. My lantern cast shadows across the walls as I crossed through the threshold of my room. I gasped as I held the flame over the bed. My husband and our children lay in a heap over the covers. Blood trickled from the openings in their necks. Oh, thank God, I whispered in relief. My burden was finally over. Alone. At last. My neighbor might be a witch. I used to think my neighbor was a witch. Her name's Eva, and her husband died a few weeks back. She never had any real ceremony for him. Said she buried him in an old family plot back east. I didn't think much about it. That is, until I saw him walking around her yard a few nights later. I nearly called the police out of fear of a break-in, but, slowly peeping out the window, I was able to confirm it. Eva's ex-dead husband was up and about, planting petunias in her garden. I tried to shake it off and go back to bed. The next morning I crept across the street, keeping my eye out for any dead old men wandering the yard, and rang Eva's bell. She answered, half naked with curlers in her purple-gray hair, and proceeded to deny my every accusation. Nonsense, she said. Hogwash, she insisted, then slammed the door in my face. Dismayed but not defeated, I waited, night after night, watching from the darkness of my room, waiting for old Eva's petunia gardener to show himself, dead or alive. It was nearly 2 weeks later when next I spotted him, cleaning up the messes her Pomeranian left in the yard. He was stiff and purple, wide-eyed and slow, bending as if he may topple and reaching with creaky hands. It was him, all right. I called the police. Right away, officer, I said. Hurry! I used to think my neighbor was a witch, but now, as I watch both her dead husband and poor dead Officer Wheatley planting petunias in her garden, I'm all but certain of it. Light up the darkness. From my royal ebony chair, I have the privilege to admire the event without being intimidated by my agitated subjects. I do get bored after watching countless heads being chopped off, so a fiery heretic execution will surely entertain us. The crowd below me is roaring in furious anger as my armed men shackle the weary old lady to the pillar on top of dry wood and straw. These shouts of fury and hate towards the convicted witch do not surprise me, since she abducted their children for human sacrifice. Suddenly, I notice that the wrinkled witch is staring at me. For some reason, I just can't seem to ignore her deep green eyes, filled with hatred and wickedness. Even though the bulky priest delivers his final prayer for her, she won't stop looking at me. Her glance is so disturbing that I finally manage to turn away, reaching for my cup of refreshing red wine. When I look back, she's grinning, revealing her jagged and rotten yellow teeth. As a guard approaches with a torch, she starts laughing maniacally, frightening my subjects with her high-pitched voice. All of a sudden, my legs feel weak, and I collapse to the dusty ground. My men try to help me, but my eyes feel heavy as I drown into darkness, pitch black. I feel like I'm falling. Fall. When I abruptly wake up, I shriek in horror as the guard lowers his torch below my feet. As the blazing inferno starts covering me, I catch a terrorizing glimpse of the person sitting on the throne, staring at me with deep green eyes. The Lobs Run Witch. Incident Report Number 921. Municipality of Lobs Run. Private First Class Alex Weller. Responded to approximate address of 410 Lowe's Lane in Rural District due to a domestic disturbance report. Passing motorists heard loud screaming and general commotion. Motorists reported what sounded like a loud female voice, possibly mingled with animal cries. Motorists declined to give name for the report. Prior calls for service to 410 Lowe's Lane include several noise complaints and 3 alleged poaching incidents. Sole resident of property known to be Ms. Marie Bilodeau, 72 years of age. This officer's previous encounters with Ms. Bilodeau were brief and contentious, but resulted in no police action. In July, this officer responded to a noise complaint at the property and found Ms. Bilodeau with various chicken parts scattered about her residence and complaining loudly about an unknown person or persons walking about her woods. Ms. Bilodeau threw handfuls of salt at this officer's vehicle and shouted gibberish both at this officer and in the direction of the woods. She declined transport to Mercy Haven Hospital for evaluation. See Incident Report number 649. Upon arrival at 0600 hours, this officer found Miss Bilodeau's residence unoccupied except for a small dog. Dog was visibly shaken and retreated toward wooded thicket. Upon this officer's approach, this officer advanced into the thicket in the direction of the dog, hoping to locate Miss Bilodeau. Approximately 100 yards from Miss Bilodeau's cabin, this officer discovered a clearing with what appeared to be a large scarecrow facing away from the cabin and towards a cluster of sassafras trees. A quick search of 2 nearby outbuildings yielded no sign of Miss Bilodeau. This officer continued toward the sassafras trees and discovered the dog pacing at the edge of a small pond. Signs of a scuffle were evident at the edge of the pond, including a worn gray shoe and a small canvas bag filled with salt. The dog became agitated when this officer approached the salt bag and began to howl when this officer probed the pond with a found stick. This officer notes that the water was excessively murky and the pond bottom could not be reached with the aforementioned stick. At this point, this officer returned to his patrol car to radio an update on the call status and begin his report. This officer requested Lobbs Run maintenance crews to drain and search pond if possible. Possible lead. Upon arriving at his patrol car, this officer found it encircled by a ring of salt. Numerous fingerprints were discovered on the driver's side window, and the passenger door showed mechanical signs of attempted forced entry. We'll file follow-up report based on maintenance crew's findings. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.